When I was recently messing about with NHT Synth, the soft synth I created that lets you generate and play sounds from your own maths expressions, I found that this formula creates something like a sitar tone. Okay, before I get flamed, I realized that note bends and slides are as much a part of the sitar sound character as the basic tone of the instrument, and we're not doing those here. And also, this sound isn't aliasing or distortion free because of the sharp corners in the waveform, but nevertheless, in the range that I just played, the sound is still kind of passable. This then got me thinking about tuning systems other than the standard 12-note equal tempered scale, or 12 TET as it's commonly called. And I thought it would make an interesting exercise to play this sitar tone microtonally, using the Shruti tuning system of Indian classical music, which divides an octave into 22 unequal parts, and compare it with playing the same melodies on a standard 12-note keyboard, which divides an octave into 12 equal parts. I should point out, though, that even though I'm focusing on the Shruti tuning system, the principles and implementation I describe here are easily adaptable to other microtonal tuning systems. And by microtonal, I don't just mean scales with intervals that are smaller than a semitone, but any tuning system that's different from the 12 TET. So let's start with a basic question. How do we go about playing this new tuning when we don't have a dedicated 22-note keyboard? Well, the simplest thing we can do is just map the notes across a standard keyboard. This of course changes the usual meaning of each key, but we can simply label or memorize the new mapping. These here are the names of the Shruti notes, per the site 22shruti.com. Alright, so how do we go about programming the 22 notes? Well, first let's have a look at how we generate the standard 12-tone equal tempered frequencies from MIDI note numbers in the synthesizer. Now in this case, the frequency of each note is related to the frequency of the next note by a single frequency multiple, a factor of the 12th root of 2. So given a starting frequency, we keep multiplying by 2 to the power of 1 over 12 to get the next frequency, and after 12 such semitone multiplications, we end up with a ratio of 2 to 1, an octave, which happens to be the only pure ratio in equal temperament. The idea behind equal tempered tuning is to allow compositions to be played in any key without having to retune the instrument each time. And in exchange for this convenience, each note is mistuned a bit. Here's the formula for getting a frequency in equal temperament, given a reference frequency. The N and the A are from a list of consecutive integers assigned to consecutive semitones. Let's implement the formula and hear it in action. When we press the keys on this keyboard, we see that the MIDI note numbers range from 48 down here to 72 up here for this 2-octave range. So if we want to tune our scale to the reference frequency of A equals 440 Hz, with middle C being this key here in the center of the keyboard range, here is the code to get our frequencies for each of the MIDI notes. The proof is in the playing, so let's give it a shot. Right, so that sounds as expected. As we mentioned earlier, 12 TET is a compromised tuning system because it doesn't follow the natural tuning of things like vibrating strings and air columns, where all the notes in the scale are related by rational numbers or whole number fractions. In contrast, the just tuning system, or just intonation, of which the Shruti scale is an example, is based on the natural harmonic series. So, what's the natural harmonic series? Well, instruments based on a string or column of air oscillate at numerous frequencies simultaneously when a note is played. The lowest frequency of vibration is the fundamental, and the higher frequencies are integer multiples of the fundamental. The second harmonic is twice the frequency of the fundamental, the third harmonic is 3 times the frequency of the fundamental, and so on. It's these multiples that form the harmonic series, a series of numbers related by whole number ratios. This diagram shows the first few harmonics that can sound simultaneously when a string is plucked, for example. Note the whole number ratios relating the frequencies to the harmonics. This is the wavelength of each harmonic, and the frequency of the harmonic is the reciprocal of the wavelength times the velocity of the wave. The velocity of the wave depends on the string's mass, tension, and length. Other small ratios are implicit between the harmonics as well. For example, the frequency of the fourth harmonic is 4 over 3 times the frequency of the third harmonic, a so-called perfect fourth interval. And the frequency of the fifth harmonic is 5/4 times that of the fourth harmonic, a major third interval. Exactly which of these harmonics appear in the sound, and their relative amplitude, depends on where the string is plucked and how it is plucked. A string pulled in the middle forms a triangle, so the vibration pattern when the string is released is that of a triangle wave, and such a wave sounds soft and sweet. Only the odd harmonics appear in the spectrum. If the string is plucked at 1/3 its length, all harmonics that are multiples of 3 are missing. The closer the pluck is to the bridge, the fewer harmonics are missing in the spectrum, and if the pluck is right at the bridge, no harmonics are missed, which is consistent with the fact that the shape of the vibration pattern when the string is released is that of a sawtooth, which sounds bright and buzzy. In all cases, the amplitude of the harmonics diminishes with harmonic number, but in the case of a sawtooth, the harmonics diminish less quickly. I've simulated the 3 string plucks, half length, 1/3 length, and at bridge, with my synth wave fuser, including how the sound becomes sine-like as it decays. Anyway, we can construct a 12-note music scale from simple ratios below the fifth harmonic, where the ratios contain only powers of 2, 3, or 5, and for this reason it's called a 5-limit scale. Here's how the ratios are obtained. Put multiples of 3 along a row, and multiples of 5 along a column. Then, in each cell of the grid, multiply the intersecting row and column values. Now, multiply or divide each value by a multiple of 2 to bring the value in a range between 1 and 2. Or leave the value as it is if it's already in that range. So now, in the 12 cells, we have the ratios for each of the notes. Here's a comparison between the 12-note 5-limit just intonation scale we've just constructed and the 12-tone equal-tempered scale. This column just shows whether each of the notes when played simultaneously with a root note sounds pleasant or restful, in other words consonant, or not. And this measures in cents the difference in pitch between the pure and approximate note. The J and D, or just noticeable difference between pitches, is generally agreed to be about 5 cents. So we can see that in some cases we would definitely be able to tell the difference between the pitches when the corresponding notes of the two scales are played in sequence, while in other cases not. By the way, for the table, I've replaced the ratio for F sharp, 45/32, with the nearest small ratio, 7/5, which is what we would get in the case of a 7-limit scale. There's about an 8-cent difference between 45/32 and 7/5, which would be on the verge of being noticeable. Let's now take a look at the Shruti scale. In this scale, each note is supposed to represent the smallest interval of pitch that the human ear can detect, and, importantly, that an instrument or a singer can produce. One common definition of the scale is as per the 22shruti.com site, which specifies each note separated by 3 whole number ratios: 256/243, 81/80, and 25/24. Now, those are pretty fearsome sounding fractions, but in fact they're all derived from the much smaller and simpler ratios that we've covered earlier. As we can see, each of these ratios are also composed only of powers of 2, 3, or 5, so the Shruti scale is also a 5-limit scale. Each of these intervals has a name. Here's a good list of the musically significant intervals in existence at the website of the Huygens-Fokker Microtonal Foundation. There's evidently a huge number of them, each with its own characteristic sound and particular role in melody and harmony. They can be considered the building blocks for a large variety of microtonal systems. So, in our case, they're called 25/24 classic chromatic semitone, 81/80 syntonic comma, 256/243 limma, or Pythagorean minor second. The 22 notes come from taking the 12 just intonation intervals we discussed earlier, and besides the unison 1/1 and perfect fifth 3/2, which remain fixed, we split each of the other intervals into an upper and lower microtonal interval. This diagram shows how the three ratios determine the frequencies of each of the notes in the scale. To get the next frequency, we multiply the previous frequency by the color-coded ratio. In order to program this without resorting to hard coding of each value, the first thing we do is try to identify any patterns that can help simplify our algorithm. If we label each of the ratios 1, 2, and 3, we see repeating blocks of 1, 3, 2, 3, punctuated by a 1 and then back to 1, 3, 2, 3. So here's our code. The first few lines are setting up the array of ratios, but the bit that does the heavy lifting is just 4 or 5 lines. In this code, we just have to specify a starting frequency, and it will generate the 22 note frequencies in the octave from that frequency. In this case, I've set the starting frequency as 1 octave below middle C. This table compares the note frequencies between the Shruti and 12 TET scales from the same starting point, in this case an octave below middle C. We can see how the 12 TET note frequencies fall somewhere between a pair of Shruti note frequencies. This table is the same comparison, but with a different starting frequency, from note D instead of C. We can see how each of the calculated Shruti frequencies is now different from any in the previous table, but the 12 TET note frequencies are unchanged. This table shows the fractional value of each Shruti note, and here are the 12 just intonation notes highlighted. I did this diagram using processing to get a feel for the relative positions of the Shruti and 12 TET notes. The width of the page is set as a 1 octave range. Then the program puts a dot for each note position based on the frequency of the note. In the case of note E, for example, we see that it's almost as far from G1 as it is from G2, but in the case of note F, it's a lot closer to M1 than M2. So, would we be able to tell the difference between a 12 TET F and a Shruti M1, for example? We know that we would between F and M2, since that interval is very close to that between the Shrutis M1 and M2. How about between F and M1? Well, here we're talking about a difference of under 2 cents, so the answer is unlikely. How about between G1 and E, and between E and G2, where E looks to fall kind of between the two? Well, between G1 and E the interval is about 14 cents, and that between E and G2 is about 8 cents, so the answer is we should be able to detect a pitch difference. In order to confirm this, let's remap the keyboard so that we have the Shruti and 12 TET notes interleaved with each other, like this. So then we're able to play and compare Shruti and 12 TET notes side by side. In order to do this intertwining, I created a new function alternating ET Shrutis, which calls the existing ET and Shruti functions in a sequence that puts a Shruti note on either side of a 12 TET note. Now, because we are playing pure tones, we will hear the contrast better between the notes if instead of making our starting C note frequency an octave below middle C, we make it an octave above middle C, which is what I've done here. I've also added a function that returns the difference in cents between the frequencies, and I've just highlighted the ones we're going to play. M1, F, M2, and G1, E, G2. Let's have a listen. I've labelled the keys as per our interleaving diagram. Okay, just before we do our side-by-side comparison, a few words about Indian classical music, as that's the structure in which I'm playing the sitar synth. Most music, as we know, consists of three main elements: harmony, melody, and rhythm. Indian classical music focuses on melodic development, performed by the sitar. Rhythm also plays an important role, as that gives a sense of purpose to the melody, and that's performed by the two-piece drum set called the tabla. Harmony is provided by the long-necked stringed instrument called the tanpura, which resembles a sitar in appearance, but is fretless and only has 4 strings. A couple of the strings play the first note in the scale, or the tonic. Another string plays an octave above the tonic, and the 4th string plays a 5th. It supports the melody by providing a continuous harmonic drone in the background. It's not played in rhythm with either the sitar or the tabla. The plucking of the strings in a continuous loop remains unchanged during the entire performance. A performance is based on a rag, a scale with a given set of notes, which can differ in ascent versus descent. There are dozens of rags, and each has an emotional significance or mood and symbolic association with a season or time of day. Here are a few rags at the 22shruti.com site. You can see how the descending notes are different from the ascending ones in some cases. So what I did was source a couple of fixed cycle tanpura and tabla backing tracks from YouTube. One's in the key of C and the other in D, and then played the ascending and descending notes of rag Kedar on the sitar synth along with the tracks. Here are the results. Of course, there's nothing stopping us from just freely improvising by ear. For this set, I came up with a couple of lead sounds that are quite different from a sitar, and threw together a couple of simple melodies with the Shruti notes, and then played them again with a 12 TET keyboard. When I played these side by side to a few people before I made the video, I got a range of comments, like one sounded more off-key than the other, or one sounded more oriental, and even one comment along the lines of, yeah, there's a difference, but not enough to make a difference. There's a number of benefits stated by the purists for tuning a keyboard instrument to the Shruti system as opposed to 12 TET. including that it's more pleasing to the ear to hear a combination of notes related by whole number ratios, or that it's easier for a singer to sing in natural tuning, the voice box being a natural instrument after all. Or that it's more harmonious for a keyboarded instrument accompanying a stringed instrument, a harmonium accompanying a sitar, for example, for both to be playing in the same tuning. And even that Indian classical music requires extreme accuracy of notes and allows great subtlety of expression, which is only preserved if the Shruti system is used. In other words, the intended mood of the artist is only authentically conveyed using this system. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, and as always, I encourage exploration. Check out the 22shruti.com site for rag note sequences that may inspire ideas for tunes. Use the Shruti tuning system in genres of music other than Indian classical, or even for a section within a piece, and explore other microtonal systems. I think it's a case of once bitten. So, okay, hope you enjoyed the video, and see you next time.